Welcome to Japan and Tokyo. Let's begin our adventure and start sketching. On the first day of my sketching trip, I headed for Shinjuku in search of Tokyo's amazing Sekaido Shinjuku art store, which is the world's largest art material store, where I hope to find some inspiration and materials for my forthcoming adventure. The store has 5 floors, including one seemingly focused on manga and anime drawing, as well as a floor for more traditional painting materials. I was amazed with some of the traditional Japanese brushes I saw, as well as the massive selection of drawing and sketching materials. In the end, I chose to go for some pen brushes, as well as metal-tipped pencils, a selection of pens, a large selection of coloured marker pens. I also found some smooth sketch pads and pencil cases. Luckily for me, the yen is quite weak at the moment, as I spent quite a bit of money in that art store. With all my new equipment, I then went for a walk nearby and found the Americo Aston Martin Formula 1 showroom, with a beautiful vintage car on display. I went inside and asked if I could sketch the car, and they said I could, but I couldn't film or take photos inside. So here's the finished artwork from outside the showroom. As the day was still not finished, I continued walking and came across a beautiful temple and decided to take a further look. The Toyokawa Inari Betsuin Temple was originally founded by the Soto sect in 1441. I found a sketching spot and began my last sketch of the day. I hoped to get some base drawings done before the light went, as the evening was fast approaching. But sometimes dusk is the best time to sketch, because if you can catch the detail before the daylight disappears, then you are left with some amazing lighting once the sun begins to set, especially in some of these Japanese shrines and temples that light up at dusk. And that was it. Not a bad way to finish day 1 of my Japanese Tokyo adventure. Now for a short rest and then on to day 2. On day 2 I decided to check out the amazing building that I had seen on the previous day, which turned out to be the Isetan Shinjuku department store. And I was glad I did, because in the basement level of this department store was a massive food hall where I discovered a treasure trove of delights for my sweet tooth. The cakes, sweets and other delicacies on display not only looked very tasty, but also beautifully decorated like works of art. It would almost be a shame to eat them, almost. The flagship store opened in 1886 initially as a kimono store, and it still has a kimono salon on the 7th floor. Of course I couldn't leave empty-handed, so I got myself a selection of beautifully decorated Japanese-made Bellamy sweets. And before I tasted them, I decided to sketch them. And trust me when I say they tasted just as good as they looked, even if they did disappear very quickly. So for the third day of my Japanese artistic adventure, I decided to take my first day trip. A trip to Mount Fuji. Many years ago, when I briefly lived in Japan, I visited Mount Fuji, but wasn't able to sketch it at the time. So now I wanted to find a perfect view to capture the beauty of it. I travelled to Fujiyoshida, a small town located near a well-known beauty spot overlooking Mount Fuji. The town itself is quaint and includes a typical shrine and a view of Mount Fuji from the town's main street. After exploring the town, I headed for the nearby mountainside and the famed Jireto Pagoda in Arakurayama Sengen Park. It can be reached by 398 steps, which sounds worse than it is. Though the view from the pagoda looks great, not only was it very crowded with tourists, there was no way I'd find a quiet spot there to sketch this view. Also, the pagoda itself was more like a miniaturized model of pagoda rather than a real one, so I decided to climb further up the mountainside and find a quiet spot to begin sketching. Luckily, most tourists were not willing to climb further and explore, which meant I quickly found a great sketching spot. As I sketched the mountain, I felt inspired by the works of the Japanese ukiyo-e artist Katsushika Hokusai and his 37 views of Mount Fuji. His work is quite stylized, and I wanted to add some of this to my own sketch, such as with lines in the sky somewhat replicating the look of woodblock printing and the exaggerated angles of the mountain itself. It is on days like this where sketching feels like a deep breath to the soul. I felt so lucky to be there. For day 4, I decided to check out Tokyo's main geek havens, Ikebukuro and Akihabara. They share a similar vibe with uniquely Japanese arcades and colourful bright lights heading skywards. After visiting Ikebukuro, I then moved on to Akihabara, also known as Electric City. As well as the typical arcades, the area has the Mandrake manga and anime store, which is a must visit for any fan as such. In fact, the area is considered Tokyo's otaku heart for all those interested in anime, manga and video games. It is also lined with many toy capsule displays, which seems so popular in Japan. Of course, I couldn't resist trying these capsules myself, and I spotted a little Gundam figure, which proved to be a bit of a foreshadow for something I found later in my adventure. So then I found a sketching spot, which just happened to be in the busiest part of Akihabara. But because it was so busy, I had to sketch standing up, but the view was worth it. And when sketching, sometimes you just have to get used to standing in crowds while holding a sketchbook. On day 5 and 6 on my trip, I decided to explore the opposite sides of Tokyo, the yin and the yang, from the busiest areas of the massive metropolis to some of the quiet, tranquil locations found off the beaten track. I started by visiting the famed Shibuya Crossing, one of the busiest crossings in the world. It is said up to 3,000 people can cross at a time. My first attempt at sketching the crossing was from a cafe overlooking it. After finishing the sketch, I decided to look for a better vantage point, as the first view didn't really capture the lights and the colours of the crossing, as the angle only showed a partial area of the crossing, which was actually mainly grey, especially as the daylight dimmed. So I eventually found another view from a walkway connected to Shibuya Station. Unfortunately, the only way I could sketch from this view was to sketch standing up in a busy walkway, but I thought I would give it a try. After I finished the sketch, I realised I need to touch it up a bit with colour pencils to show some of the street lights bleeding light and colour into the sky. Next up, I wanted to find Tokyo's opposite, a quiet spot away from the crowds and the tourists. Luckily, I knew of a temple that perfectly fitted this bill. I had sketched there before my previous trip, but only with pencil, and when I had been there it was almost empty and the location was beautiful for sketching. But strangely enough, when I visited this time, the shrine wasn't empty. But it turned out to be a welcome change to what I had imagined, as there was an arts and crafts festival in the grounds of the Joshi gawai Kishi temple, showcasing some unusual and beautiful works from near and far. Again, I felt deeply privileged and lucky to find myself sketching in such a location on such a beautiful day. Within the temple grounds, you could also find red torii gates belonging to the nearby Katayori Inari Shrine. The temple has been popular with both samurai and common folk since it was built in 1578. For days 7 and 8, I wanted to explore the differences between Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples in Tokyo. So I started by visiting one of the most famous temples in Tokyo, the Sekaido Temple in Asakusa, also known as the Kinyurizan Sensejoji or Asakusa Kaon. The temple is the oldest temple in Tokyo, with its history dating back to 628 AD. And it's the most visited religious site in the world. One of the main attributes that is unique to Buddhist temples in Japan are the gatehouses, often large, that lay at the entrance to the temples. Also, some bigger temples have pagodas. These temples can also lay at the heart of major festivals, one of which I will discover later in my adventure. I found a sketching spot, which was a bit tricky on this day, as my first week in Japan was during the Golden Week, a major holiday week in Japan, and this meant the temple was heaving with tourists and was crazy busy. Luckily, the temple is not always this busy, and if you know when to visit at times, including early evenings and outside of major holidays, you can find the temple much quieter. After visiting the temple, I set about exploring the Mai Shrine. The shrine complex sits at the heart of a big park and is surrounded by torii gates. These gates, often giant, sometimes painted red, sometimes not, are a very common part of Shinto shrines, though sometimes Buddhist temples also have them. The main shrine is dedicated to Emperor Meiji and his wife Empress Shoken, and was built in 1915 to commemorate their roles in the Meiji Restoration of 1628 to 1889, a period that saw the country open to the world, as well as the power switching from a shogunate to an imperial government. After I found my spot to sketch, and thankfully, after I'd almost completed my drawing, all the drawing and inking complete, I got told to stop by security officials, as apparently you're not allowed to sketch anywhere in the Meiji Shrine complex. It seems you can take photographs, film, even have weddings there, but not sketch, which seemed odd to me, but it actually appears to be quite common in major tourist attractions in Japan. As a very visual country with a love of art, this type of rule still confuses me a bit, as it only affects artists. This was also especially odd, as when sketching in Japan, I very often got approached by friendly people interested in what I was doing and keen to know more. So I took my drawing to a nearby park and finished the watercolouring of it there. So the big differences I noted between Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples were the gate houses and sometimes pagodas of the Buddhist temples, and the torii gates of the Shinto shrines, though these gates are not completely unique to shrines. There are many other things that set shrines and temples apart, but I discovered a lot of them were not wholly unique to one or the other. On day 9 I decided to explore an area of Tokyo I'd never visited before, Odaiba Island, an artificial island in Tokyo Bay. Initially my plan was to sketch a giant Gundam statue located on the island, but when I arrived I found Tokyo had not one, but 2 giants. As I got off the train I spotted an unusual statue on the harbour front. I'd almost had to do a double take. Was I in Tokyo or New York? Standing on the waterfront overlooking Tokyo's skyline was a giant replica of the Statue of Liberty. Apparently it's an exact casting of the original, though it is smaller in size. One thing I noticed during my trip was how interested the locals and even tourists were in my art. I've sketched all over the world in many areas and countries where people react differently to me sketching in public. In some countries no one even bothers to or ever approaches you, and at other places people are very interested and often come over and talk to you to see what you're doing, taking pictures with you and so on. Japan is one of those places. People seem incredibly interested in art as a skill and are always super polite and friendly when they approach you. After I captured the Statue of Liberty, I then made my way to the giant life-size Gundam statue. This statue was even more impressive than I imagined. It was much bigger than I thought, and was even partially animatronic. I found a spot and began sketching. Though the statue of course isn't real, it wouldn't take much to imagine a life-size giant robot taking to the skies like in one of its anime. Just as I almost finished and was ready to colour the artwork, the robot sprang to life and its armour changed colour as it switched into a different mode. Luckily I'd previously captured a photo of the colour of the armour before the change, but this is one thing you have to keep in mind when sketching things that can change very quickly, and sometimes it helps to have a photo for reference just in case something odd like this happens. For day 10 I decided to take another bonus trip, so I took the bullet train to Kyoto, which took 2 hours each way. This was not bad as the total round trip is just under 1,000 kilometers. Apparently the train reaches speeds of up to 285 kilometers an hour. I've been to Kyoto before and sketched there, but just with pencil. I knew Kyoto was very busy with tourists, and tourism in Japan has skyrocketed in the last few years, especially in Kyoto. But luckily I knew some places that were more off the beaten track and would be quieter. Though my first couple of places to visit were definitely not that. I visited the Kinkakujoinji Temple, or Golden Pavilion, the Imperial Palace and the Arashiyama Bamboo Forest. The Arashiyama Bamboo Forest was smaller than I thought, and like the Kinkakujoinji Temple, it was full of tourists. Finally arrived at the Daitokuji Temple, probably my favourite temple in Kyoto. Actually it's a complex of smaller Zen temples that has a history dating back to 1315, and thankfully it is not so popular with the tourists, at least compared to some of Kyoto's other temples and shrines. Inside the complex of it is my favourite small but stunning temple, the Ryogenin Temple, built in 1502. I have sketched it before in the past, but I wanted to do a full colour sketch using the art materials I bought in Tokyo. I just love the Japanese stone gardens on show in this temple, and it often feels like I have them all to myself. Art and sketching often feels like a form of meditation to focus the mind and live in the now, and while sketching such a Japanese garden, you get the feeling of being paused in time as you focus on the rocks and combed sand which illustrate islands and oceans. And so day 10 of my sketching adventure came to an end, and I headed back to Tokyo, ready for day 11. If you'd like to see more of my Japan adventure, and the second part which will be coming soon, and which includes a stunning castle in the mountains, a Japanese tea house worthy of a samurai, the resting place of the fabled 47 Ronin, a cat temple, incredible festivals, and even a Miyazaki wonder. So like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified once part 2 is published. Thank you for watching, keep sketching, I'll see you next time, sayonara.